Now, these protests in the US cities of Portland, Oregon and Seattle, Washington in particular are a real worry. They show a terrible fracturing in US society. People are getting hurt. There's a very clear political dimension to all of this too. There's tensions right around the country, of course, but in these two West Coast cities, renowned as Democrat strongholds, cities of the so-called peace-loving liberal left, in these cities, the Black Lives Matter, defund the police and anti-Trump protesters have been encouraged and even supported by local mayors and the like, even as they've turned violent. President Trump has sent in federal agents to try to restore law and order. Some see that as provocation. Other protesters then have tried to stop them. We've seen vandalism, arson, violence and shocking incidents of passers-by and protesters drawing guns on each other. At least one protester has been shot dead. And there's a pandemic. And it's now only 100 days till the US presidential election. So where to from here? Who better to speak to than Miranda Devine, who's covering US events for the Daily Telegraph and the New York Post. I caught up with her earlier. Miranda, great to talk to you again. You're going to try and help us work out, understand what's happening over there. It seems very difficult to fathom where you've got these protests happening in West Coast cities. They're Black Lives Matter protests, they're anti-Trump, they're defund the police, they're basically anarchy. They become violent. Trump sends in federal agents to try and restore law and order, yet he's the bad guy.
Yeah, it's really nuts. You can only understand it if you realise that every single thing that happens in this country at the moment, 100 days from the election, is all about the election. And it's really, especially in the Democrat states, the so-called blue states and blue cities where you're seeing all this unrest, they want Trump out. And because Joe Biden is not much of a candidate, you know, he's been stuck in his basement for the last 4 months and he really is not all there. And so all they have really is to go on hating Trump.
It seems that they're playing into his hands because he becomes the law and order candidate. There's a lack of leadership on the liberal left side of American politics, and it's probably his big shot, isn't it, to be the bloke who's going to try and restore law and order while others are doing this to American cities.
Yes, look, that's my gut feeling, but it's still a work in progress. I mean, the main thing on people's minds, I think, really that Trump has to get on top of is the coronavirus, the pandemic and the crippled economy. But the visuals on your screen every night of these anarchists, you know, in Texas, for instance, last night, a young protester was shot dead. He himself was toting an AK-47 to the protest. You know, America, the whole gun culture in America makes all these violent anarchist protests even more fraught with danger. And in those towns like Portland and Seattle, it's really made the lives of many of the people who live there miserable. And then there's the whole tail end effect of defunding the police, or even in Minnesota, where they've abolished the police in Minneapolis after the George Floyd murder. And in New York, they've defunded the police by 1/6, by $1 billion. And they've also passed a whole lot of laws, the city council has, to just cripple the police, hobble them from being able to do their job, with the result that the police are stepping back and violent crime has spiked incredibly. I mean, shootings are up 200%. We're back down to the sort of homicides and gun crime that, you know, New York hasn't seen for 15 years.
It's just so difficult to fathom. Yet you've got some of the mayors, some of the Democrat mayors siding publicly more with the protesters than with law enforcement. As you say, there's been killings, there's been guns drawn many times between protesters and other groups. How close is America to widespread civil unrest, or, as you said, suggested earlier, away from those particular cities you wouldn't know about it?
Look, you wouldn't really know about it. It really is. It looks terrible on Twitter and on your screens. And yes, in these pockets, these few thousand anarchists and Antifa people are causing mayhem. And the police everywhere have been hobbled, and they're retiring at the rate of knots. I mean, they probably retire even more if there were jobs to go to. They're definitely demoralised everywhere. And this is, a tragedy for a country that just 20 years ago went through 9/11 and the police and the firefighters were the heroes. Now they're enemy number one, and it's anti-police rhetoric is so destructive. And what it's doing, coupled with this criminal reform movement that's just gone through all the city councils, all the far left, the socialists, the Democrats, is this whole idea that we have to decarcerate. That means let people out of jail. In New York, they've half emptied Rikers Island. The streets are just full of criminals who should be in jail and are now, bashing and beating and robbing and shooting people. A 1-year-old boy was shot dead the other day when he was having a barbecue with his family in Brooklyn. It's really a dangerous place in a lot of New York and in a lot of cities around the country. And it seems as if the Democrats want this mayhem to continue in a weird way, because I think they see it as they're sowing chaos so that they can portray Donald Trump as Captain Chaos and Joe Biden as the calm, reassuring, Uncle Joe, middle-class Joe from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who can come in and make it all better.
Extraordinary stuff. Deeply, deeply worrying. We'll keep an eye on it.